Hey everybody, it's Miss Tiffany, and I just wanted to do a quick little video talking about different facts about the SAT and ACT. I feel like this should be a pretty in-demand video, so bear with me as I try to do this again in one take. Ultimately, I just want to give you all the information about the SAT and the ACT. Whether you decide to take these exams moving forward, if they're available to you or not, is up to you. But I wanted you to have all the information to make those moves one way or the other. So, the biggest thing about just the history of the SAT used to be called the Scholastic Aptitude Test, but now it's really just called the SAT. And the sole proprietor of those exams are held by a nonprofit or not for profit organization called the College Board. We also have what's called the American College Test, which is the ACT. A lot of these tests are used as a way to get into or part of the admission process for several different institutions, a lot of ones you may have heard of and some you may not have heard of. So just some quick facts about the SAT and the ACT. Each exam is given about 7 times a year, and usually that time frame starts around July or August. These exams are given at specific testing sites, and usually those sites are on Saturday. And so lots of the proctors and lots of the educational leaders are done by people in education. And those start times at those specific testing centers are around 8 a.m. And testing sites are usually school buildings, they're usually community centers or some sort of educational institution. So the price right now for the SAT is $52 with the essay and $68 without. And the ACT price is $46 without the essay and $62.50 with the essay. So the big reason as to why that's a thing, ultimately institutions, if they are, not test optional or not test blind, they usually require students to have an essay affiliated with the SAT. That's part of their standards and that's what they use. So whenever students are taking these exams, just so you're clear, try to get the one with the essay if you can. So let's just say those costs, not so much. There are fee waivers available for eligible students. And so you can always come talk to me about that, or just research it yourself and see where you can find a ton of fee waiver opportunities. And fee waivers are good, not just for tests. A lot of times they're good for college applications because those can get really pricey, especially if you're applying to several of them. And they're also good for subject tests and other benefits go along with it. The only other thing that I like to say is that students with accommodations, so students that either need more time or maybe they need bigger font on their tests, these are accommodations that you can get. You could start your documentation with your school counselor. Ours happens to be Mr. Willis, so he's the man, the go-to. And then on the College Board website, there is a whole step-for-step process that families must complete with that documentation of their 504 or IEP. If you're a student who knows you need these things, but you've never gone through the process, I highly recommend you talk to Mr. Willis, or you go on the College Board website under what's called SSD. And those are just abbreviations for students with accommodations. So this next part is just the SAT versus the ACT. What are the big differences? Like who does better on which particular test? So there's no hard science to any of this. Ultimately, I have here the side by side of what you can expect. I'll try to share this presentation in a PDF, either on our school website or on this channel. Ultimately, the SAT and the ACT, the thing that separates them is a science section is added on the ACT, whereas the SAT does not have a science section. Now, usually students, when they hear science, they think biology, they think chemistry, they think, anything in the lab sciences world. Well, this is not that kind of science. The type of science that you'll see when it comes to the ACT is more so just about reading graphs, reading charts, critical thinking, really using a hybrid of physical and social sciences. So usually if you're a student who tends to gravitate more towards the humanities, um, you're more of a visual learner, like you're very much needing to do hands-on activities or group work, like you gravitate towards that. Statistically speaking, you tend to get a little bit of a higher score on the ACT. So that's something to think about. But ultimately, both tests are about 3 hours and almost 4 hours if you decide to take it with the essay. There is reading in both. There is math in both. Um, there is an optional essay with both. And then there's the like writing language that you'll see on both as well. They look a little differently, but ultimately, if you intend to take either of these tests, the math that you would have need to complete is algebra 2. So as long as you have up to an algebra 1 or 2, you should be good to go as far as the math sections are concerned. Now with the SAT, there are calculators allowed in certain sections, and then some sections they say no, you can't have one. And the scores are, I would say, the biggest difference between the two. The score for the SAT is out of 1600. So the score ranges from 400 to 1600 on the SAT, and 1600 is a perfect score. And on the ACT, the score ranges from 1 to 36, 36 being a perfect score. So why take these tests? I have a few different bullet points here, but ultimately the biggest thing I want to say is that a lot of these tests can warrant national merit scholarships, which is really cool for students who get, you know, scholastic awards for the different talents that they have in these being displayed in these tests that they're able to show. A lot of times, SATs and ACTs are a requirement for the college admission process, as we discussed before. But you want to make sure you have these at least in your back pocket to open up both admission opportunities for you as well as scholarship opportunities for you. That's usually my big argument as to why one would want to take these tests. So just going into exam structure, again, we talked about this a little bit, but it's about 4 hours. You'll see 52 questions in the reading section for the SAT, which means you'll have 65 minutes in that section. There's a writing section with 44 questions, and you'll have a timed 35 minutes to complete that section. There is a math section, so there's 58 questions and 80 minutes total. So ultimately the 55 minutes is calculator optional. And then there's 25 minutes of a section without calculator use. The ACT, very similar. The English will have 75 questions at about 45 minutes. Math will have 60 questions, 60 minutes. Reading will be 40 questions with 35 minutes in that section. And then the science reasoning that we discussed earlier is 40 questions at about 35 minutes. The thing that they say is, yes, there are more questions on the ACT, but the ACT is very direct. It's not going to ask you to think about the question really before you answer it. It's going to say, solve for X. It's going to say, tell me more about this specific passage. Whereas the SAT, they like to get a little more critical in the way that they present the question. So that way you have to think about it prior to your answer, just a little more. So in that respect, the SAT gives you a little more time per question on average. So let's talk about criticism of the SAT and the ACT. I mean, ultimately at this point, um, a lot of people are aware, but not all, that there's huge critique when it comes to these exams, which is why a lot of these colleges have adopted a now test optional or even test blind, where they don't accept scores at all, um, part of the admission process. So no longer making it as much of a requirement. The reason why, in a nutshell, it's just these exams have been scientifically proven, if you look at a ton of data, to really disproportionately benefit one group of students over another. And we don't want that. We want equity in education. We want to make sure that students get a fair shake. Um, so as a result, there's been a lot of criticism as to, who benefits most from taking these exams, or even just going into these institutional structures that still uphold these sort of unfortunate, sorry, that was my phone ringing, unfortunate outcomes for a group of students. The biggest thing that I like to tell students is the SAT and the ACT, it's not a measure of how brilliant you are or how much work you've put into your family dynamic or if you have straight A's or not. It doesn't mean any of that. The SAT and scoring high on the SAT is all about how well you know how to take the SAT. It's how well you take the ACT, not about the aptitude and your ability to be successful in college. So that is another big reason that colleges are starting to lean a little bit away from the SAT and ACT requirements. And finally, this whole presentation is really just to kind of give you information as it stands today about where colleges and high schools are starting to take the SAT and the ACT. So because of the pandemic, some parts of the country are still able to test students for the SAT or ACT, while others, say in more remote learning areas, major metropolitan areas, where there's very high density of populations, those students may not have as many opportunities to test. Um, so due to extremely long waiting lists and a lot of backlog testing sites, so for example, if you're a student who registered for any of the SAT, Saturday SAT exams or ACT exams, they probably still have not gotten back to you because there's not been testing centers open and available readily to students like there was before. So our testing center is right down the street usually. A lot of our students take it at Seattle Central or they take it at Franklin High School because Garfield is not a testing site in that way, unless it's the school day exams. But we don't have that option. I believe at this point, the closest testing center to us is about North Dakota. So that is something that's happening. So a lot of students are having difficulty registering for exams or even getting a seat for exams that they were previously registered for. Um, but if you are in a position to take the SAT or the ACT during the pandemic, students are required to wear masks and practice social distancing while testing. Due to a lot of the inconsistencies where students are able to or they're not able to take these exams because of the pandemic, most of the top tier colleges, so the ones that you've heard of most, I believe 1,400 of them at this point and counting have decided not to require test scores as part of the application requirement process. And this is even going into 2 to 3 application cycles. So that's all of our juniors, that's all of our current sophomores, and it may even impact our current freshmen. So I've put a link to a really good resource that talks about all the different pandemic related updates. I highly encourage you all to take a look if you can. I'll try to include that link in the chat. But this is the presentation. These are the facts and as I understand them. And I do my best to try to give you guys as much information to make as many decisions, educated decisions at that, that you can. So again, if you need to contact me, please understand I'm experiencing a very high volume of emails, but I am trying to get back to you all as soon as I can. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and stop talking. And I hope that you have a great day.